Uh, all right. So my talk is how to create great salt formulas using Brine, a new open source tool. There's something to that effect. I don't really remember what I put in the. It's on the app. You guys can look it up. So I'm gonna start off this talk doing something a little extreme here. I had prepared a few slides here, but where we're going, we don't need slides. All right, so we're just gonna delete those. I'm gonna kind of wing this, play it by ear a little bit. I haven't really timed all this. I've got some stuff for us to try out together and play around with this tool we've created. I'm going to start off. You guys are probably looking at me like, who the hell is this guy? If you haven't guessed, I'm a big OpenSUSE guy. I really like OpenSUSE. I do not work for SUSE at all. I am a official member and ambassador, advocate now, they call us, with the OpenSUSE project. You can Google Drew OpenSUSE, and basically everything that shows up that's on the first page there is me. I work for a company in Pasadena called OpenX. We are an online advertising company. The important thing to know there is we're using Salt. Scale matters. You know, we've got large amount of systems. Utilizing Salt, migrating from an old configuration management system to Salt. And to do that, we're looking at tooling and trying to ease developers' adoption of Salt. So I guess I should do this, give you guys a better understanding. There's OpenX website. There is a careers page on here if you guys want to check that out. We're always looking for really good engineers, really good sysadmin types, DevOps. If you know Salt, you'll probably get along with us really well. Let me find this again. All right. So Brine. You guys don't know what it is because it didn't exist before we created it not too long ago. It's a silly little script at this point, but it's proven to be useful in a couple different ways. So we have had developers, other site reliability engineers. I should have mentioned, I'm a site reliability engineer with OpenX. Right, that's my title. So other people on my team or outside my team, you know, we're all trying to use Salt best to our abilities. And some of us know Salt better than others. And so getting people spun up using Salt is, I mean, it's YAML. It's some basic tooling that is pretty familiar to a lot of people. But there's still some people who don't know that and feel like there's a bit of mystery there. They hear the word Salt. They don't know what it is. They don't know what are the best practices. How should we be implementing this? Or they'll try to implement something and we look at it and go, no, don't do it that way. Do it this way, right? And we've tried to document this, right? We've tried making wiki pages, you know, recommending ways for people to create their Salt roles, and you know that assumes they're going to take the time to read the wiki page, which you know not everyone does, and I think that's fair. I mean, if we can do something to help that situation and help move people along faster than just sitting there reading some documentation, I think there's benefit there. And so a couple of us got together in a room and we were kind of spitballing ideas how we can help. Should we be documenting? What could we do? And we fell upon an idea of, well, what if we could provide, you know, a tool that could help people just get pointed in the right direction. Doesn't have to do everything, but if we could cover the 20% of the things you do in, or if we, cover the 20%, 80%, right? Like 80% of the time, you're only using a small subset of salt's state modules and features. Typically you're installing packages, you're managing files and starting services, things like that. Pretty low-hanging stuff. Figured, we could probably get people pointed in the right direction just by showing them what that looks like. So we kind of played around with an idea. So I want to show you something here. This is what we've seen. Can you guys see this okay? Okay. So this is a fairly decent salt roll, right? It's all right. This works. It's a little Elasticsearch. At OpenX, we have a concept that we use called elements and roles. In the root of our salt states Git repo, we have a directory called elements and one called roles. Elements are these kind of small, modular, generic pieces of configuration that you can include in your role. And ideally, if maybe you'll have to extend a couple here or there. Maybe you're going to exclude something from one state file or something like that. But typically, a role is just made up of elements. Sometimes you might have like a meta role, which includes other roles. So I just want to talk about that for a moment, just because you're seeing the path here, element, and what the heck does that mean? But this is an Elasticsearch element. It's pretty straightforward, and it works. But stylistically speaking, I think this is not helpful. This is messy. I don't think these are that great of names, and maybe this should be an element of itself, right? Like in fact, we have a JDK element at OpenX, a Java element. Why are we re-implementing the wheel here? We're putting the version number right there. So I'm going to just show you guys really quick what I'm talking about here. So what is Brine and how does it work? So I've got some Vagrant stuff set up here. If I can find I think this is, all right. So here I've got a master. It's already been high stated. It works. Take my word for it. We've paired it up to, I've got an MQ service here. So that's a RabbitMQ server. And here's a saltconf web. I think right now I'm going to start with this RabbitMQ service. Let's play around with this a little bit. So here we go. I'm going to high state the machine. And there we go. So you'll see the path to my role there. Role, Q, RabbitMQ service. Saying there's no state files, right? No SLS files. So here in serve salt on our master, let's go ahead and serve salt. Go role, Q, MQ service. All right, so there's a file in here called Brine file, right? And let's see. The only two things in this directory structure here is my Brine file and my Erlang cookie to cluster the RabbitMQ. So I'm going to open up this Brine file. You guys can see this okay? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right, so here's my Brine file. I say role name. I give it a description. I can give it some details that I want it to populate into the README. Here, I'm going to just give it a list of files, and the equals means that's what I want the mode to be on that file, right? And if I don't have to, that's kind of a more advanced feature of Brine, like putting an equals there is pretty fancy, right? And then here, I'm going to include this RabbitMQ element, right? So this is going to be a pretty simple role. There's not going to be a lot here. The cluster, the Erlang cookie, is managed in the role, not in the element, because likely each role is going to implement its own cluster, right? So that's why that's being managed here. So let's just go ahead and run Brine. Oh, I have to be outside the vagrant. Sorry. Here we go. Master salt roll Q. All right, same file. I'm just sharing them into the vagrant, right? So Brine, and you'll see I now have my init SLS and my README. Okay, pretty generic little README. It does give a little signature here as to that Brine helped us out. And then let's take a look at the init SLS. So it populated the role name here in the comments, the short description. It populated here at the top of the comments as well. Here's our includes, and we even linked to the document in this comment header for the section. And here we have a bunch of files we're managing. Well, in this case, it's just the one file, right? Now, if we take a look at the Brine file, I made myself some notes. You'll see there is a comment in here. Brine does right now cover, we can use some comments. Now, I do want to just let you guys know, Brine is not like this fully fleshed out tool. After we had that initial conversation of how we wanted to help people kind of get started with Brine or with Salt and get them pointed in the right direction, we came up with the idea of having a tool. We sat down, 2 hours, we banged out a very minimal set of functionality that did files, packages, services, and that was really it. Didn't do this equal sign stuff. And maybe we have, I'd say, 5-10 hours somewhere between there into this outside of that original 2-hour window, right? So this is a very simplified tool. This is minimal viable product. That's what we were going for. But even still, it's fairly useful here. Now, one thing you'll notice in the comment, it says the ownership is wrong, right? So that's one thing it doesn't do. Yet we don't have a way. We have a way to tell it what mode. We don't have a way to tell it that we want this to be, I believe it's the RabbitMQ. I believe that's what the README said. User and group. So really, Brine isn't necessarily supposed to be something that you have and will really, you'll always want to keep running it or making your role from it. Likely that's not the case. I could see a day where maybe it's mature enough and it has enough features where you could do that. But as of right now, that's not even what we were really aiming for. But it is kind of nice that it is kind of reproducible, right? So here's this file. I just changed that. If I run Brine again, it's back to the way it was. It's very reproducible just by giving you this very simplified, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term brine. It's water with salt in it. It's watered down salt, right? It's to remove syntax really from learning Salt. Now, this element here, this element RabbitMQ, that's not build out either. So I would run high state, but for the sake of time and show that it fails, just believe me, it's not going to work. So let's go and play around with the RabbitMQ element. Okay, let's take a look at its Brine file here, and notice I'm putting these things in all different orders, right? Like comments commands here are here at the top, descriptions after that, README, packages. I mean, I can move these anywhere I want. Doesn't really matter. Brine will put it all in the same place, right? Which is kind of nice. It kind of orders things in a certain way. I would love it for us to be able to massage that a little bit. Like some cases you want a command to go in a certain place, like I want this to go before the files, or I want this to go after the services, or something like that. But typically we do packages, files, services, and requires we can't express just yet, but we do have a plan for implementing a way to express requires in this format as well, and just make it really easy to, maybe one character comment on the line with your file or something like that, telling it where to go. And you'll see here in the packages, I'm giving it an equal sign and the version number. Here in the README, I'm giving some details about that Erlang cookie should be managed in the role. And here's the element name, Q, RabbitMQ. I'm not putting element in front of that because element name, it assumes that that's where it's going. And then I have includes. So I run Brine, and I've got, not only do I have my init.sls, I'm also including a map file called version.map.jinja. And here, it's pretty simplified. You'll see I'm just installing the version, calling into the Jinja map. And the name of the blocks are automatically generated. We're not inferring the name because the requisite system gets a little funny. We've experienced sometimes when you don't do that, especially with files, right? It won't apply like everything that you tell it to. So, we want a consistent naming scheme in these for the name of the state block. And we like to have everything in its own block because it's a little cleaner. There was once upon a time, it was an issue, maybe with packages you wouldn't want to do that, but there's a config value you could set in Salt now that will aggregate those and it pass those all to Yum or whichever package management system. So we just put them all in their own block for sort of readability and cleanliness here. Now you see commands right now. This is just a command.run, and it's getting popped at the end. I don't really want that there, so I'm going to massage this one a little bit too, and just move that maybe here. All right. I don't remember if I roll Q. I don't remember if I changed this yet. No. All right. So I've got that there shared into my master, so I don't need to commit anything. So let's go back here to our MQ service machine. Let's high state it again. We've got some other elements getting applied to this machine as well, so that's what you're seeing the MOTD pass by there. I know this isn't a lot of fun watching this high state, but we really went from nothing there to just running like a single command, generating 2 fairly good salt rolls. And actually, let me go back to, I did want to show you guys the map. So got a map file, a map directory here. Here's a version map. And here you'll see it's got our RabbitMQ server And we've broken that out per environment. We'd love to make this a little bit more like customizable at some point, adding environments or adding different kind of map support and stuff like that. I could see that being an interesting like option you could turn on and off. Right. So it was because if we take a look at the Brine file, oops. So if we take a look at the Brine file, see how we're doing equals? And we're specifying a version number? Because we're specifying a version number here and we weren't before, it's going, I'm just going to make you a version map then, right? Because, I mean, making those version maps by hand that's kind of a tedious little process. I mean, some of these things, and I don't expect someone they don't know Salt very well or at all, to be able to know that, we should probably be making a version map there. Or, don't have the name inferred by the block name, right? They don't know these sort of little edge cases and things that you kind of learn when you use Salt a little bit. But I think this works better than just documenting it on a wiki somewhere. We give them a little tool and say, there you go. Now, it's just basically a little list. You just put the files here, and it's going to populate a place where you need to put it and put it there. And name it .jinja, and we're going to assume it's a Jinja template because it's likely going to be templated, right? So those are assumptions we make in Brine, but they kind of enforce a certain level of standard. And there's a lot of, when you have a lot of roles created the same way using this tool, there's a real kind of, you almost start to take it for granted, the sort of cleanliness and where you can, I know this is going to be under the comment files, right? All my files are managed there. And I'd love Brine to at some point see like, we've listed like 20 files. Let's break that off into like a files SLS in the directory as well and just do a relative include on that file, right? So this way it kind of just keeps your init SLS clean. But those are things that I would like to do in the future. Those aren't now. I'm just sharing a little, vision there with you. Now we'll see. I was having some trouble with this earlier. I think there was an issue with, I've got something wrong other than the permissions on that Erlang cookie. But you see almost all of them ran just fine. I was kind of hoping we'd have some time where we could like dig into this together and like figure out, with Brine we could use this to like regenerate some stuff, but we're gonna leave that off. I beat us to the punch in most of it anyways, so let's go here to this role, and it's just a little web server. We want it to do Nginx, okay? Sorry, I'm going to go to we have a network Nginx element. I've already generated this with Brine, so this should save us a little bit of time. But you'll see here, again, I'm specifying the version number, right? I'm saying directories, services. Now, I am going to run this again and show us the output here. Now see how it says Nginx running, right? Service.running Nginx. Now let's go here to our Brine file. Let's simply put a minus in front of that. Service.dead. So you can list explicitly things you don't want running as well. Again, it's really easy for me to explain to someone who's not worked with salt before. Just go ahead and pop a minus at the front of that, and that'll make sure that when it gets, when your state or your formula gets generated, it will turn off that service. And what I really have enjoyed seeing that people will use this, and then they will stop using it, but continue to make roles that look like this. They just follow that pattern. They'll they'll write a Jinja map from hand, but they'll follow the same pattern. They'll follow the same naming structure. And I go, oh, you use Brine for that? No. Okay. So it starts to point people in the right direction, and they just start going with what they know. They saw that, oh, this is what Brine did, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So let's turn back on Nginx here. So I like to describe Brine as a salt role or a salt formula or state file initializer. But more than just that, I think it's really powerful as a salt user initializer, right? Just kind of like brings you up to speed a little bit on salt, gets you pointed in the right direction in the context of the thing you're trying to do, which I think is key there. It's always easier for me to like modify maybe a file that already exists than write something from scratch. You know, it almost feels like a writer's block or something. Sit there looking at a blank VI, and I don't know. I'll look up something online and just copy it in there, and I'll modify it from there, right? I think we've all done that. And this gives you a little way to just, all right, this is pretty simple. I'm just basically making lists under these little headers that just start with a %. And I could see this being useful as it continues to mature and we add more features to this. All right, so I think we've seen that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the role. I did name the role a little funny here. I don't like the name of the role, but it'll work for our purposes. Okay, I also generated that one for us too. And here, you see I'm managing a file. I'm including the Nginx element. Here's my role name. There's my description. You know what, let's read me. This was created during a live demo at SaltConf 16. All right, you see that's in the README. I'm sure this is starting to look really familiar to you guys by now, right? We're just including it. There's our comment header for files, and we're managing that file. I'm hoping this one high state's a little bit better. What did I do wrong? Let me see here. Sorry, this is live demo, so. Oops, let's see, salt. Oh. Yeah. That looks like that's why. Let's see. What do we do here? Is it 3? I don't think we need it. Grains. All right. Hopefully that should do it. Oh, I think I need a... All right. Sorry, guys, that was missing some grains. I don't know how that happened, but it did. All right. So we're watching this one. Right.
As a new member of the team, where do I go to find the documentation for you, Brine?
Sure. So we are open sourcing this tool. You will find it on our GitHub, and there's a little README in the GitHub. It's not on this one yet. I will be uploading this to Git shortly after. I was preparing for the talk, so I wasn't sanitizing the Git repo. So after the talk, it will be pushed up. It's under MIT license. You know, we all can contribute to it. If you guys have ideas, let's put them in there. I mean, the code base is like 573 lines right now, so it's just a little script. But the potential, I think, is I mean, it has a real use case now, and the potential is there for additional features in the future. And because it's so small, and I mean, we cover cron jobs, files, commands, directories, packages, syscontrol, a few other things like that, and it will just go ahead and, you know, the documentation in the README just says like the name of the header, the like percent like cron job, right, and then gives a description. And
so at what point are you just like creating a renderer?
We've thought about that. So if it could support all we could figure out a way to map it to the actual modules, the state modules, I could see where it would be pretty trivial to write a render around this, and I think that would be really cool. I mean, just
Is it that you think that the states, like the interface for creating the states, is prohibitively hard to understand for new people to solve?
it depends on the person, to be honest. I've met people who picked up the YAML and had no problem and didn't even ask a question about it, right? And then there's others who feel there's a barrier there. You know, but even me, I mean, I've been working with Salt. Give you some context. I've been working with Salt since I think I have notes like where we brought it up in 2011, and I started implementing it early 2012. Corey, who was giving a talk in this room just before me, he and I were working together, and he introduced it to me, right? And we implemented it together at a job we were working at that time. So I know Salt fairly well, but I still really like using this because it's really easy to just put my files in there and not have to. It almost feels like it's removing all that boilerplate for me, right? It's not that it's hard; it's just tedious, right? And if I can remove some of the tedium, even from those people who are experienced with it, and have we have a level of like reproducibility. We have the Brine. We could keep that Brine file around. You know, we could check it into version control. Right now, Brine will if you run Brine, and it will just overwrite, clobber everything that's in that directory. So I always tell people, don't put it in the same directory. Once you've built your role, take it out of there. But yeah, I mean, you could feasibly version control that as it becomes more mature. We could do more things with it, like create a renderer that just reads the Brine file directly, or a Brine syntax file, right? Yeah, the question was around documentation, and it's there. It's just very simple because it's not fully featured. Like I said, we're trying to do the 20% that you do 80% of the time. All right. So I think this one high stated. All right. And let's see. I think it's this IP address. Let's bring up a web browser here. And yes, I'm using OpenSUSE. Oh no. Hello. Saltconf. What the hell did I name that file? Oh, it's ugly. But it works. It's ugly, but it works. I think maybe it's because there we go. So it's at github.com OpenX Brine. That's where that is at. So you see from the Brine file, I just run Brine and it was there. And I mean, I think it pairs well with the paradigm we have of the roles and elements too, where you're just, a lot of our roles are pretty simple. They're just including a bunch of other elements and maybe doing an extend on like the service to add some requires or watches on some files, or maybe you exclude a block you don't want, something like that. Another great reason to have them all in the same, in their own block. This way you can exclude on the block. I don't know how much time I've taken up here, but do we have any other questions? I think as far as demo that I had prepared, that's all I got. But if we want to make another, I have an idea if we want to play around with making this into a Brine file from scratch. I can quickly show you how I would go about doing that. Sure, yeah, go for it.
My question is around the standard that you use for creating the new directory with Brine. Right? So where is that?
I would love for there to be maybe like a Brine RC or something like that, like a .brine RC, where you could like configure your own sort of rules around that stuff. There isn't such thing right now. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, we were aiming for minimal viable product, and we've already, it was getting very hairy to maintain, so we wrote it all in like one Brine object in Python, and then, just go from there. Like it's very simple, but yeah, it's already been through like one little rewrite, and I imagine, some retooling around it will need to happen in order to really make it maintainable going forward. But right now it's very small, so. But I think the usefulness is still there, even at its current state. Any other questions or comments, concerns, whatnot? All right. That means I did a good job, right? Yeah. Yeah. There's no. So yeah, did you guys want to? I mean, it's not rocket science. Getting that something like this to be in Brine. Typically what I do is I just take this, right, and I just put this under files. I'll go here and I'll put this under files, and I'll include an element for JDK, right, and I'll put that under services, and boom, then I run Brine and I'm basically done, right? Like, so right now the description section is required, but when you don't have a description, it will give you a Python traceback or whatever. So it doesn't give you a pretty error that says, oh, this is a required field, please fill that in. But yeah, so you'd have to fill in a description there as well. But oh yeah, and then for package, I would just put a equals and do that, and my Ginger map would be created. So taking something that's even a little all over the place, it's very easy to just take this, spend like 5 minutes, turn it into a Brine generated role, spend another 2 minutes adding the requires after I've generated the init SLS, because right now we can't express that in Brine just yet. And then I'm done. And it's as simple as that. Because at that point, just the tedious part then, which we haven't yet solved for, is you gotta template your file, like your files. You know, that's the manual thing, but it makes building everything else in the role super easy. Way less tedious. Yeah, and I think that's most all I had prepared for. I already.
Do you have so the paradigm of the elements and roles? Do you have that outlined in there? It seems like a cool idea. I don't still entirely understand it, but
Sure.
it reminds me kind of like something out of a similar convention of what the roles and policies.
Yeah. So I describe it a little bit in the README for Brine, just because it is kind of core to what we're doing with Brine. But I can show you really quick. Basically,
Like elements are like the smallest collection of like if you want to run Nginx, this is the Nginx element. The role might be like a higher order of.
it's more specific likely, right? So your element is likely going to ship with some sane defaults, right? So it might come with maybe you're going to give it a blank Nginx config, right? You don't even give it a source line. You just give it, right? Like it's just stupid. And then in your README, you're like, hey, if you're using this element, make sure you extend the source line in your role, right? So the block is there, and if they don't extend it, they're getting a blank config file, or they're getting just what the package shipped with, or something like that. And then the role is specific, and it's got your templated file in there. Maybe it's calling to pillar, maybe it's using a Jinja map. I quite like the Jinja maps just because you don't have to call back to the master to use those. So if it's not a secret, I tell people put it in a Jinja map in your role. But yeah, the role is very specific. Element could span multiple roles, right? You might be using the Nginx element in like 5 different roles, but likely they're going to be extending the stuff that really matters, right? Right. If it can stand on its own, if you could like apply it to a machine and that is the identity. Oh, I've done something, haven't I? We didn't need that anymore. It's fine. Yeah, if it can stand on its own as an identity of that machine, like that is the whatever web server, that's your API database or whatever, then that's a role, right? And if it's not, and it's like some thing like RabbitMQ or MySQL or even just a user or a config file, right? Like it's just this JSON file needs to be on these sets of roles. Well, we don't want to configure that in 3 different roles. We want a single place to manage that. That's where the element is, and you just include that. And likely something like that, you don't even need to extend, right? You just include it, and Bob's your uncle. You're off to the races, right? That's it. And so here we have a special role that gets applied to everything called core. And you'll see core role just includes motd, bash, tmux, tcp dump, and nettools, which gives us ifconfig, right? You know, really should have a minion in here too, but I didn't do that because I was sharing files from Vagrant. Yeah, but so elements are just, it works really well, especially like here in core. I had someone ask me once, well, if the core role, why don't we just have that's not really shared configuration. All machines get core role, right? Because this is a special role that's going out to every machine. Every machine gets this core role. Well, yeah, but I still want to kind of encapsulate that and be able to just comment out that include. Now I'm not getting the MOTD or something like that. Like it just makes it very easy to manage. They're very modular, very small, componentized, and it's very easy to test before you put it into a core role too, because you can apply it to a machine through some stub role or through a role that's already applied to that machine, right? You just include it in that role, test it out there, and then once you go, oh, okay, that's working good, maybe you try it on another machine, okay, that's working good, and then once you've vetted it and you feel confident, you can put it into core role, and now it goes out everywhere. And it's just boom, you just include that element and you're done. But yeah, it's, so Brine uses element name and role name all smushed together. And you have to pick one or the other, you can't have both. And there is a weird little bug, like if you say element name, but then you give like a full path, it'll like duplicate, it'll say element, because if you say element name, element.admin.system MOTD, then it'll duplicate that. It's not smart enough to clear that up for you. Or if you do like, you're confused and you put role, it'll do element role, and then you're like, what did I do? Oh yeah, I typed role name instead of element name, right? Yeah, it's not terribly clever when catching things like that, but it's doing what it's supposed to at that point. At that point, it's kind of your error, not Brine's error. Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't really timed any of this to see how long this would take or test it out. Is there any other questions? So I will bring up, here it is. I've already started migrating some of our issues into here. I've already got 3 placed in here as enhancements. Like you saw, comments can't go anywhere in the file. They have to be at the beginning of a line, which is really annoying sometimes. The Brine parser I could see being really useful outside of just the Brine tool itself. So, you know, we have it on our radar to maybe break out the Brine file parser into like a library that we can just include in Brine. And then, like I say, the express require relationships in Brine files, that's something that I would really like to do. It does add a little bit of syntax to it, so maybe it's not for, you know, the person who's just getting started with Salt or Brine, but I do think it would be a useful convention to have in Brine, just so this way you don't have to go in and massage your init SLS just to add requires, because that's so, I feel like that's so fundamental, it should just be there. Other ideas, like we would like to have Brine write a formula file and also maybe have like a %pillar, and you could write your pillar data structure right there under your %pillar, and it will just plop out a pillar.example. And then once you have those sorts of things, it would be pretty trivial to make that into an SPM package. So you could do this, kind of quickly define what you want, run Brine, run SPM build, and boom, now you've got a package you can pass around to your friends using Salt that want to do the same thing. Maybe they're using elements too. I could see elements working really well with that. You know, you'd want to package up your elements as SPM packages and pass those around. That'd be cool. Also, to write the formula file, I think we'll need to have like something like a %4OS or OS or whatever. Like what OSs this was built for. Like what does this support? And then it could build it based on that. Maybe the file system structure is a little different that it lays out for you. I don't know. Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.